Gonna take a quick attendance. Mr. Chris, Marcel, Zizzy, Lawrence, Kiwi, Nora, Potru, Cave Woman, Caver, Nora, Larry, Sal, that should be JT. Okay, X is down there. That's JT anyways. There's Lutra and Dr. Chris. Aggie's downstairs. Oh, alrighty. Time to get this shoe on the road. Alright, so tonight's story is brought to you in part by MistLore.com for some of the history, dpwr.net for the Denis dates, archives.com for the surface history corresponding to the Denis dates, and the Cavernian Calendar Converter, which was written by Brett Middleton of the Fuzzy Physics Institute for converting between Denis and surface time. Tonight's story is from Myst, the Book of Atrus. Approximately 10,000 years ago, there lived a people who called themselves People of the Root, or, in their language, the Rhone. They lived on a planet they called Root of the Great Tree, or Garterne. These people were given a special gift from the Maker, whom they called Yavo, the gift of writing. Not just any writing, but the knowledge of how to write links to other worlds and other times. This became a great source of pride for the Rhone. They used those other worlds that they were able to link to as their personal playgrounds, and the people of those other worlds as their personal slaves and servants, often abusing those people. One particular writer became upset with how their mores had devolved, as pertains to the otherworlders. When it was learned that Garterne was going to be destroyed, he wrote a special link to a new world, a new age. He and his followers would live in a deep underground cavern, that they may return to their humble roots, a place without pride. He called this new place New Start, or, in their language, Denis. One of the first building projects of this new place was the construction of ventilation shafts that would bring fresh air from the surface into the cavern. During construction, and as it was nearing completion, several workers mysteriously disappeared. It was assumed that they made their way to the surface to start a new life. Unfortunately, after only 300 years, pride found its way back into the hearts of the people. It started with King Shomat, but did not end there. For over 6,000 years, the kings ruled Denis. Some were good, some were bad, and some were very bad. In time, the people fell away from their faith in Yavo, the Maker, and followed other teachings. Pride grew in the cavern. This culminated with the last king, King Kareth. He abolished the rule of kings and set up the system where Denis would be ruled by the guilds. Pride flourished under this system of government. Still, the cavern survived. Denis became a great empire, ruling thousands, if not millions, of worlds. That is, until the Denis year of 9368, when an 18-year-old girl from the surface found Denis. Fears of the surface dwellers and of how they might corrupt the people set into motion events that would bring about the destruction of the empire, the fall of Denis. As I have told these stories of the Denis, we learned about Agaris, the architect of the fall. He was bent on revenge for being falsely accused of a crime he did not commit, having all he had stripped away from him. This left him bent and twisted inside, as the Denis would say, nekesal. Using the surface girl, Anna, he set his plans into motion where a respected member of the Council of Denis, Viovis, would also be falsely accused, giving him an unwitting ally. We learned how Anna met a member of the High Council of Denis named Atrus, and the two of them fell in love. So deeply, in fact, that they became soulmates. Eventually, they were married. After several years, they started a family. Choosing the name of a Denis child was a matter of grave importance. Children were generally named after a family member, or a great person in their history. They chose to name their son after Atrus's grandfather, Gen. Of the grandfather, Viovis's father, Ricari, said, "Gen is a good name. He whom he is named after, his father's father's father, was a great man, or would have been if time had been kind to him." Atrus's grandfather met with an untimely demise, the nature of which has been lost to the annals of time. Little Gen's early years were fraught with difficulties. First, he was deathly ill as a baby. Unable to keep food in his stomach, he came close to death on a number of occasions. Eventually, he grew out of that, and grew to be a strong, healthy child. He entered the Guild of Bookmakers at the age of 4. It was a boarding school run by the guild, and each guild had one. After dealing with severe homesickness for his first 2 weeks there, he heard a speech given by a visiting master from the Guild of Inkmakers. This inspired him to learn all he could of his Denis heritage, and was the beginning of his pride. It was during this time that Viovis was falsely accused of trading in illicit ages, and was sentenced to a prison age for the remainder of his life, and was rescued by Agarus, after which the two of them began to commit various acts of terror and planned to foment a revolt of the lower classes against the rulers of Denis. Gen continued to grow and gain in strength and knowledge. By the time of his 8th year, he had excelled so much in his studies that he was given the great honor to speak for his guild at the end-of-year ceremony. By this time, Viovis and Agarus' original plans for revenge had been thwarted by Anna, and Viovis was sent to a newly constructed prison age, whose descriptive book was burned. Unfortunately, though it was closed and burned within minutes of Viovis having linked through, it was not done quite fast enough. Agarus was able to link to the same spot that Viovis had been standing in, and linked immediately into the prison age to rescue his cohort. For you see, Denis' pride had become so strong, it had prevented them from changing anything to do with traditions. This included the procedure for securing prisoners. They always used the same prison cell in Denis to link prisoners to their respective prison ages, and did so on the same day of the week, at the same time of day. Had they changed the time of Viovis being sent to his new home by even 5 minutes, Agarus' plans would have been thwarted. He would have been caught, and Denis would still stand until this day. So, thus blinded by their pride, the 5 lords changed nothing save the construction of the prison age itself. Agarus was able to rescue Viovis. Though he was seen momentarily, his appearance was similar to that of an after-image, and was easily dismissed as a trick of the eyes. Less than a year later, on Nisan 8, 9400, as Gen had just finished his speech, Veovis and Egaris struck. They released a deadly cloud of contaminant into the cavern, killing many. Not satisfied, they linked the bodies of the dead into the ages owned by the Denis, completing the destruction of the empire. Only Atrus and Anna's age of Gemedet was spared by Veovis, because she had spoken for him at his trial, thereby sparing his life. Gen was away at the guild school during Veovis' second trial, and was unaware of what had transpired. He was unaware of how his mother's act had actually served to save his life. Gen, though he knew his father had become gravely ill, did not realize that it was because he had become infected with Veovis' plague. Gen so loved his father that he was blind to just how serious his father's condition was, that he would eventually die. On top of this, neither parent wanted to worry Gen. There would be time enough, once on the surface, to explain to their son why Atrus was soon going to die. As Atrus led Anna and Gen through Denis on their way to the surface where Anna and Gen would be safe, 4 things occurred. First, they discovered that there was only one boat left that had not been burned or sunk by Egaris and Veovis, so that they could cross the lake to get to the southern gate and the path to the surface. Second, as Anna and Gen went ahead to secure the boat, Atrus went to investigate a cry of pain near where they had been standing. It turned out to be Veovis, mortally wounded by Egaris after a falling out. Third, Egaris had captured Anna and Gen, and used the boat to take them to Kvir, Veovis' island on the lake. He had planned on using them as bait to capture and kill Atrus. Finally, Veovis gave Atrus the means to get to Kvir ahead of Egaris and save his family. Nearing his own death, Atrus sacrificed what little time he had left to alter Egaris' age into a death book, which would kill whoever would use it. Because he had fallen at the last minute, Gen had been locked out of the room where the final confrontation between Anna, Atrus, and Egaris occurred. Threatening to destroy all of Egaris' remaining books, Atrus linked through the death book, causing his own death. Enraged at Atrus, Egaris followed Atrus to his own demise. Having been outside in the hallway, Gen was unaware of what had transpired. He believed that his father was still alive when he and Anna left the cavern and emerged on the surface. He never gave up the belief that his mother had left his father behind to die, and never forgave her for that. As the years progressed, his anger and hatred towards his mother grew. He knew that she had intervened for Veovis at his trial, and so blamed her for the fall as a result of her meddling in the affairs of Denis. Worse, he blamed her for the death of his dear father Atrus. By the time he was 14, he could no longer tolerate living with his mother. So, in the Denis year of 9406, approximately 1750 A.D., the year that Johann Sebastian Bach died, and packing only a few belongings, including a photograph of his father, he left the safety of the cleft. From all available accounts, he traveled west, meeting a tribe of Native Americans called the Amad. As an aside, the only picture of Anna is in the form of a sketch from the Book of Tiana, of her pleading with the council for mercy for Viovis. Once among the Amad, he noticed some striking similarities between theirs and Denis culture. They even possessed imager technology. This was astounding to Gen. It is believed that when the ventilation shafts were first created for the cavern, the missing workers were not trapped in landslides and rockfalls as thought during construction. Rather, they made their way to the surface. Apparently they found cavern life not exactly what they were expecting it to be. Dissatisfied, they left for the confines of the cavern, found the Amad, and made a home for themselves with that indigenous tribe, eventually intermarrying with the people of the tribe. Evidently, they preferred the leastness of a culture with a lack of technology rather than the leastness found living underground. One particular Amad maiden caught Gen's eye. Her name was Lara. They eventually fell in love and were married. He took a photograph of his wife, who wrote on it, "To Gen, my husband and my salvation. I dedicate myself to the love that rescued me." Though we do not know what danger from which Gen rescued her, or if it was rescuing her from the primitive life of her people, we do know that the photograph of his father and of his wife were the only two that Gen kept with him for the remainder of his life, both on Riven and in his 233rd age. But I digress. Though her given name was Lara, Gen referred to her as Keta. We don't know if this was a pet name that had some meaning in the language of the Amad, or a meaning in Denis. We do know that they were both completely devoted to each other. She even recorded a message of love for Gen on an Amad imager, saying, "Peace be with you. You know I will always love you to the greatest extent." Eventually, she became pregnant with their first child. We don't know about the pregnancy itself, but the birth was difficult. Very difficult. Worried about his wife, he put aside his hatred of his mother and returned to the cleft. Unfortunately, he had waited too long. Anna did her best with what she had, but that was not good enough. She could not save Keta. It was fortunate that she was at least able to save the baby. Gen was distraught over the loss of his wife. He blamed her death on the child, and probably Anna as well for not doing more. He left the cleft without ever holding his newborn son. Looking at the child only reminded him of his loss. He could not bear the thought. The Denis year of 9411 was approximately 1755 on the surface. This was the year that Major General Edward Braddock was defeated during the French and Indian War at Fort Duquesne, which has become modern-day Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the United States. This was the war that won the lands of the Western Reserve for the colonies. So, in the Denis year of 9411, not even bothering to name his son, Gen stomped through the pool of precious water at the bottom of the cleft, ascended the stairs, and climbed the volcano, disappearing over the rim without so much as a glance over his shoulder, and returned to the only home he remembered, his true home, to Denis. Please join us next week as we learn about Gen's only son and his life with Anna. The end. You're welcome, Honora and Sal. You're welcome, Kiwi and Cave Woman. And thank you all for coming tonight. You're welcome, Larry and Marcel. I'm glad you all enjoyed it. I'm sorry, what's low tonight?
Attendance seems to be a bit low tonight.
A little bit. And time to close out the video right now.